So let's start. So very important one-liners for theory and criticism. So first of all, father of Russian formalism. ठीक है, तो father of Russian formalism कौन है ये देख लेते हैं. मिखाइल बाख्तीन. मिखाइल बाख्तीन रशियन फॉर्मलिज्म के फादर हैं. ठीक है, एंड रशियन फॉर्मलिज्म इज actually naturally called as Oppo Jazz. We call it as Oppo Jazz. So Oppo Jazz is the name of the group. So father of Russian formalism is Mikhail Bakhtin, and the original name of the group was Oppo Jazz. All right. Similarly, second question is founder of psychoanalytical criticism. Founder of psychoanalytical criticism. The answer to this question is Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud. Very important. So the third is Sigmund Freud belongs to and his great work was Interpretation of Dreams. So the third point is founder of or who coined the term collective unconscious. Very important term under psychoanalytical criticism. The answer is founder of collective unconscious, Carl Jung. Fourth point, Cambridge School of Criticism. Cambridge School of Criticism started by F.R. Lewis, I.A. Richards, and I.A. Richards called S. Eliot's The Wasteland as music of idea. Then Neo-Aristotle School. Neo-Aristotle School is also called as Chicago School, and the founder of Neo-Aristotle Chicago School is R.S. Crane and Elder Olson. Elder Olson, very important. R.S. Crane and Elder Olson. Sometimes the name of Wayne Booth is also included. BOO. Wayne Booth, one work is most important work, guys, and it is the Rhetoric of Fiction. Very important work. Wayne Booth का Rhetoric of Fiction. Founder of New Criticism. Founder of New Criticism. It's also called as words on page approach, decontextualized approach. And who was the founder of New Criticism? First of all, the term was coined by Joel Spingarn. He coined the term, please. Okay, Spingarn, G-A-R-N-N. G-A-R-N, sorry. Spingarn, right? And the founder of New Criticism was published the book by the same name in the year 1941. Now, this work is considered as a manifesto of New Criticism. And as I have given you the name New Criticism, it's also called as words on page approach. It's also called as decontextualized approach. It's also called as close reading approach or close reading. So under some names of new criticism thinkers, very important, Wimsatt and Beardsley. These are some important names, Wimsatt, Beardsley. If somebody asks you that who is the greatest of all, it is Clint Brooks. Clint Brooks, please do remember this name and put a star over here. Clint Brook is known for his work, The Well-Wrought Urn, Well, W-E-L-L, Wrought, W-R-O-U-G-S-T, and Urn, U-R-N. So the Well-Wrought Urn, and he coined some important terms like paradox, okay, and some other terms. So Clint Brooks was there. There were many others like Alan Tate, okay, and so on and so forth. Okay, they were also sometimes called as Southerners because most of them came from the southern part of America. So they were called as Southerners, and most of them were from agrarian economy. That means they were basically from agriculture fields. So that's why they are also called as agrarians. And because most of them migrated from south of America to north of America, so they were pejoratively also called as fugitives. Fugitives. Fugitives means bhagode. Okay, that means the one who runs away from his own place is called as fugitive, right? So these are some of the important names of the early phase of the writers of New Criticism. Okay, now guys, why is it called as New Criticism? Because under this New Criticism, the thinkers who were there, they actually did two important things. Number one is they did not consider author's biography. All right. So that means they ignored the biography of the author. Okay. And the second is they did not consider the context of the text is also ignored. Did not consider context of a text. Okay. So that means they said that literature should not be viewed on the biography of the author, based on the biography of the author. It should not include the context of a text. That means, what is context? Situation, the situation in which the text is written. So why should we do that, or why should we ignore the biography and the context? The answer to this very famous question is because these two things make us go away from the text, and we should be rather doing the close reading of the text. And that's why the central idea of new criticism is heavily dependent on the very important movement of the mid 19th century of European literature, aestheticism. Yes, guys, I'm talking about one of the most important movements of literary history, art for art's sake. Aestheticism developed in Germany and France, and then it caught up in England, of course. And what was the central idea of aestheticism? They said that, and you should write it in capital, that art is autonomous. Art is autonomous. Do not attach art to morality. They wanted to detach arts from morality. They said that art should be enjoyed for the sake of it. It should not be mixed up with the didactic purposes. And my dear learners, considering that fact as the base point, new criticism developed in the early 20th century, where they focused on the development of the text, ignoring the biography and the context of the text. So the base idea behind new criticism was that of aestheticism, which basically said that art is autonomous, or rather, art should be detached from any morality. We know, guys, if we go back to my basics class of English literature, what was the true purpose of any artistic piece? The true purpose of artistic piece or artistic composition or literary composition is that it should have a form and a content. Now, the form means language and the content means subject matter. Or if we go further, the two purposes of literature is actually, one is to, you can say, to preach or didactic, and the second was pleasure. So you can also relate aestheticism to the hedonistic idea of pleasure seeking. Founder of structuralism, Ferdinand de Saussure, very important. So guys, Ferdinand de Saussure was a Swiss linguist and is sometimes considered as a father of modern linguistics. And Ferdinand de Saussure basically argued that any language should have a lang and a parole. Very famous question asked in GATE 2023 also. Lang and parole, where lang is any structure, that means referring to the structure of a language, and parole here means utterance. When we speak that language, that is what parole is all about. So he said that any language has two key components, lang and parole. So, and structuralism, he argued that we are dealing with science. In fact, he was also a semiotician, which means the one dealing with the science of reading science. That means this one, science, means it's a homonym. So you can also relate it to science. I am not talking about science. I am talking about SIGNS, that is science, right? So it means the code, anything which gives us meaning. He says that is a language. So in a beautiful analysis, he said that three key ideas as the very important ideas. What were the three key ideas, guys? That any language is abstract, very important. Any language is relational. And the third and the most important is any language that we create is constitutional. That means man-made. The meanings that we associate or attach to them is completely abstract. That means having no fixed value. All right, abstract means anything that is changeable, right? Relational, that means it is comparative. It is, if you need to understand the meaning of the house, you need to understand in terms of hut. in terms of bungalow, in terms of mansion. So every word in a language is related to the second word. And the third is constitutional. What does uh, constitutional means? That language creates its own context, situation. That means, please understand this, that this is a very famous line that Sassoon gave, that language shapes realities. Please understand. It looks very simple, but it's not that simple. Language shapes reality. What does it mean? Actually, when language was formed, what was the central idea of forming a language? The central idea of forming any language is to give expression to our reality. So the earlier purpose of the language was to give expression. Means if some reality is there, we have to express it. That means the reality must be expressed in any language. That's why the language was originally invented. But Saussure inverted this, reversed this. And what did he famously said? That it is not the reality that we express through language. Please pay attention. It is not the reality that we express through language. On the contrary, the language that we give shapes our reality. So, for example, it's the language which is actually creating the meaning and not the meaning given the words by language, right? So it is a bit double-edged sword. If you try to think it in the other way, you get caught up in this. But what I'm trying to say is that Saussure emphasized on the importance of language. Because he was a linguist, he did not emphasize much on the philosophical meaning of the language. He said that it's because language is there, that's why we are giving meaning to the reality, right? So, and when he said that language is abstract, relational, and constitutional, what was he actually trying to make the case of language? He said that language is actually, it's a very important term. Language is, it should not be studied in a historical manner. Okay, that means the approach that we should have, it should be syntactic approach, not deistic approach. We should be reading language through syntactic approach. What does that mean? It means reading language at the present time, here and now. That means how we are reading the language at the present time. That is syntactic. And as I've said, the other word, what does that means? The historical aspect. That means reading language through the chronology. We also call it as philology. Please mark this word, philology. Philology, right? Philology is basically the historical study of the language. In fact, the first Philological Society of London started the traditional study of the Oxford Dictionary, if you remember, the great Oxford Dictionary, which is considered as the biggest invention in modern English language. Oxford Dictionary of 1934, very important. So the base of Oxford Dictionary was this society in London in the 19th century called as Philological Society of London. So that, in a way, started first the study of the words. Of course, we know the first authoritative dictionary compiler in English language is Dr. Samuel Johnson, and his dictionary, the 1755 dictionary, called as Dr. Johnson's dictionary, or work between structuralism and post-structuralism. Very important. Which writer and which work is considered as the hinge or connecting link between the structuralism and post-structuralism, the two very big movements of the early 20th century and mid 20th century, respectively? The answer is the death of the author, the proverbial, the famous work, The Death of the Author, written by the great French post-structuralist or structuralist, whatever you may call him, Roland Barthes. All right. The Death of the Author, which famously led to the coining of the death of the author leads to the birth of the reader. So this famous work led to the reader centric approach of modern theory. which eventually led to a very famous discipline of modern theory, one of the most discussing topics of modern literary research, reader response theory. Please pay attention. RRT, as in short it is called, reader response theory, is just directly opposite to new criticism. Whereas new criticism vouched for the closed reading of the text, in reader response theory, the focus shifts to the readers and it automatically goes away from the text and making it a very dynamic approach and also favoring the readers as the so-called the meaning makers of the text, and in a way completely leading to the conclusion that the so-called author, or should I say authorial intention, very technical and important term, authorial intention is completely, guys, the death of the author. This seminal text also included two very important definitions, often confusing: readerly text and writerly text. So, readerly text actually means the text which demand no special attention. That means the text that are very easy to understand. Please be very clear. Otherwise, this question, as I have said, is very confusing. The texts which are easy to understand, or what should I say, in which there is no deviation of meaning, no deviation of meaning, right? And what does that mean? That means that they are favoring the readers, okay? And the writerly text are those texts which are actually not easy to understand. That means that these texts should be, or they require attention from the reader. These texts require attention to seek meaning. So what does that mean? So guys, very important. It simply means that readerly texts are those texts in which authorial intention is actually very easy, or should I say, is visible. That means whatever the writer is trying to say, that require no understand, that require no strong part from the reader to understand. But writerly texts are difficult to understand. They are not easy. Okay, so just make a formula that readerly, that means the one that is reader, it means easy to understand, and writer, because he's a you know learned man, so his texts are not easy to understand. So point number 8, founder of post-structuralism. Post-structuralism, guys, is sometimes also known as deconstruction, which is, I think, 5-star, very important. Deconstruction, or you can say applied post-structuralism. Deconstruction is basically nothing but the concept of post-structuralism applied on language, applied PS, I'm writing here. So the founder of post-structuralism, or deconstruction rather, is a very important fellow called as Jacques Derrida, a very famous writer from France. He is known as the founder of deconstruction, which basically means reading against the text. It's also called as positional reading. Very important term, guys. Also called as contrapuntal reading. So why do we deconstruct the text? Basic question that comes to our mind. Sir, what do you mean by it? What do you mean by reading against the text, reading against the grain? What does that mean? That means that whatever the text is saying, just focus on what the text is not saying. What the text is not saying. That means whatever the text is saying as indirect meaning. That means the satires, the paradoxes, all right, the allusions, and most important of all, there is a word that they have been asking in net multiple times: pastage. P-A-S-T-I-C-H-E, pastage. what does the word pastiche means in terms of deconstruction or post-structuralism? Pastiche is actually a word from the stitching, okay? It means multiple stitching or stitching together of various languages, sorry, various forms of languages or literature. Stitching, stitching of various elements in literature is called as pastiche. Okay, so that means you can say in very easy language, mixing of genres, genres. So for example, if you are writing an ode, you mix the style of ballets, you pick up some elements of epic, then you mix it up with sonnets. So all kinds of mixture produced together is called as pastiche, which is basically one form of, you can say, postmodernism also. Okay. And so, guys, the question that comes to our mind, that why are we reading against the text? Why are we focusing on the indirect meanings? Why are we looking for satires? What is that we are trying to find out in paradox? What is in illusion? Illusion is, when the text is referencing to some other text. Say, for example, you can say the wasteland is full of illusions. So, what I'm trying to say is that why? The big question is why? What is it that makes the writers like Jacques Derrida to question the essence of language, to decode the language of what it is not saying? The answer to this why is very important, guys, and this is where I require your attention, is that they believe the same formula, that language is abstract, language is relational, and language is constitutional. But when we are saying all these things about language, what tool are we using to say all these things? If I say language is abstract, if I say language is relational, if I say language is constitutional, in which medium am I saying it? I am saying it again in language. So language, actually, for saying anything, even to say that language is abstract, relational, or constitutional, you require language. So language is self-referential. The more you try to say language, the more you refer it to it, the more you refer to the language itself. So language in that sense is self-contradictory. It has no fixed meaning. It has no essential meanings. So what does that mean? That means that, oh, if language has no authorial intention, you cannot decipher the final conclusion of any text. What you should need to do, you should rather try to understand what the text is not saying. Because the modern theory, remember, please remember the word, that all the modern theories, they are political in nature. Very important word. When I talk about political, what I am trying to say, they talk about the rights of marginalized, right? They talk about the rights of people who are deprived, like females, like homosexuals, like poor people, like blacks. All these people are marginalized communities. They are on the periphery. They are not at the power of, they are not at the center of power. So all these theories, they try to be political in the sense that they try to fight for the rights of the underdogs, right? And for that they need language. But language, as we know, was governed by the elite class. Right from the use of language and literature, we say that it is mostly controlled by the elite class. Now when they got the control, they used language as their weapon to assert their supremacy on the lower class. So the all the modern theories, be post-colonialism, be post-structuralism, be postmodernism, they try to challenge this idea that language is only exclusively means used by the upper class. They try to challenge that upper class have already used language as a weapon for their supremacy. And that's why they say that, oh, let's look at what the text is not saying. Let's look at the satire, the paradox, the illusion, the minor characters. That's why we say that so many plays of Shakespeare have been remade in modern era. Why? Because they believe that Shakespeare's major characters were always favored, or they have certain biased approach. But it is the minor characters of Shakespeare, if we resituate them in the modern era and then look at the play from their angle, then we will actually empower the literature. We will see the literature through the eyes of the underprivileged classes. So, my dear learners, this is the whole idea of any theory, that they try to be interdisciplinary, they try to be political, they try to gather or garner the maximum attention of those characters of that language which is used by the suppressive society, and they make the canon of that. That means the collection of those texts, and then they try to resituate those texts or try to recreate those texts in the modern era. That's why in literature, particularly in NET and GATE exams, we see the adaptations of classical literature or classic novels in the modern era have been done more and more. And we see people like Salman Rushdie and many writers using postmodern, post-structuralist technique to re-emphasize the importance of literature as a tool of political supremacy.